here. And then I'll go in here and I'll highlight me, I think, if I can. Spotlight so that people talking in the background don't get rid of stuff. Okay, so this is the fly I'm gonna tie today. And as a little background, a number of years ago, I had an opportunity to meet Dave Whitlock, and a very nice gentleman. And he is a fairly famous fly tyer from the States. And thing I learned from him was how to tie deer hair, how to both spin and stack deer hair. He passed away here, I think it was right at the end of September. So he's not around anymore. The video that I took this pattern from, it was also interesting. You guys here out in the coast probably never saw the Saturday morning fly tying show that we got out of Spokane PBS station. It was quite interesting. There's a fellow who, Leroy Hyatt, who ran Fly Tying the Angler's Art Saturday morning show. And he had a buddy named Dave Ingebrigtsen who passed away a while back. And they were fun to watch. But this particular pattern, he had Dave Whitlock as his guest. So I watched the video and I said, well, I can tie that fly. I've learned a little bit. Well, it wasn't the most pretty thing in the world. As I said, I took the first one I tried of this pattern. I took it in to show my wife and I said, this is not the ugliest fly I've ever tied in the world, but it's probably close second. So, but I learned a few tricks again from a video. So we'll start this. It's called a waking minnow. Waking as in making a wake when you strip it through the water. The materials we talked about in the chat is some silver Flashabou. This one's a little bit kinkly, so it's a little more shiny. And then you'll need some saddle hackles, yellow and grizzly. So there's your standard grizzly saddle hackle, and you want them to be from the part of the neck where the feathers have a little bit of an inward curve to them. And then yellow, finding a yellow saddle was a major issue. So I had this hen that had a few short fibers down here that's nice bright yellow. And again, I want some that are fairly narrow and have a bit of curve to them. The idea is that makes this tail that has the feathers curve outward. And then the other thing is deer hair. Well, I had some deer hair, but not great stuff. It's for me, this is a standard deer hair, and this is the kind of length you would prefer, nice long deer hair, because it would make for a more extended body part of the fly. And the yellow is not bad, it's a little shorter, but getting white was a real pain. This is the best white I've got, and it's a little too short. But if you could get some longer white, bleached white deer hair, that would certainly be a lot more useful than the stuff I got. So it's going to look a little ugly, but what the heck? It's more about the pattern and the techniques information than it is about the materials for me today. The other thing you're going to need is you'll need some. This is intended to be a weedless fly for pike and perch and other fish that live amongst the weeds. And you need some mono to make a weed guard. So I'm using 40 pound here. You could probably get by with 30. The other thing are a couple of little tools that will help. The first one being, Dave was a big proponent even way back of using super glue. And I found that if you get the big bottles of super glue if you're only tying a few patterns like this, they can be a pain in the butt. So I got this stuff. You buy them at the hardware store in a bottle like that with a whole bunch of these little things. And they're great for small jobs. You don't need to, so you just put a little cap on them and you get a little bit of super glue out. The super glue is what helps hold this fly together. The other thing you need is prismatic eyes, and you want them to scale to the head size. So these are the small ones. And to get those attached, the hint from Dave Whitlock was to use rubber cement, because super glue won't hold them. And of course, the glue that's on the back of the fly, when you get it off the paper, it's not enough to hold them. So the super glue is for other things. So what he said was rubber cement. Well, here, rubber cement, I've got a supply called Flashabou, and that's what it is. And it holds the fly eyes on the fly. They don't come off. They stay on. He also suggested if you're going to fish these ones with toothy critters, you might want to coat the hair with epoxy, but I'm not going to do that for a morning tie session. So we'll forget that. The hook is a Mustad. This is a Mustad standard O'Shaughnessy, which means it's got a ring eye, and it's about a 2x long. You could probably get by with a shorter hook, but I needed the room to get the head to go right. So that's the fly, and we'll start with getting the hook out. This is a number 4, so it's a good size hook. And being a 2x long, it's got a bit of shank length, but not too much. And it maintains the gap between the head and the body of the fly. So that's why I like the 2x. And of course, one of the things you want to do is get the barb down before you tie. And Dave talked about that in the video about how many flies he tied and put the barb down after and broke the barb off and had wasted all the time tying the fly before not getting to fish it. I put my hook in the vise, and he used white thread, and I think you could get by with colored thread. The white, I think, I'm using 140 denier thread, so it's fairly solid thread, because you want your thread to be fairly solid. You don't want really light thread, because trying to tie this deer hair on and getting it to flare properly, you need some strength in the thread. I'll start right behind the eye and cover the hook shank down to a little past halfway. Now, what I didn't do, which Dave did in his video, is he uses a chrome plated hook. And in order to make the hook not slippery, he would take a file and he would rough out the hook to take the shine off, and then he would cover it with the thread. And the reason he covered it with the thread is the next step here, which when I take my thread back up to the front of the fly, and I'm going to leave about a 1/4 inch between the eye. I'll take my monofilament and I'll lay it on right behind a little bit behind the eye, and tie it onto the hook, but not on the top, onto the side. And I will wrap this down all the way down to just before the point. And I'm going to trim it off there. Now, the purpose of this, according to Dave, because it was that he liked a wider body on this thing. Well, I discovered after tying the first couple of these that it's not just the wider body, it's a flat body, which when you're stacking the deer hair on, it doesn't let the deer hair rotate. Now, to make sure that the mono doesn't rotate around the hook, you super glue it down. I probably got a little extra super glue on there. So the other trick I learned is you get rid of the extra super glue with your Kleenex. Okay, now when he got to the back, he took his mono again to make the weed guard. And this is a trick that next time I want to tie a fly with a weed guard, I am definitely going to use. What I used to do with these weed guards that go around the back of the hook was I'd put it on top and take it down through the eye, underneath, through the eye and then around it. And that kept the weed guard from being pulled out at the back. His trick was much simpler. You take your mono and you take the very tip of it and you flatten it with a pair of pliers. See, that makes a little flat spot there. And what you do is you tie your thread in right behind that flat spot on top of the hook. And that flat spot means that that won't pull out. Brilliant idea. Now I wind this around the bend of the hook, probably about a third of the way around the bend. And then I'm going to put kinked end off of this.
Sorry, Dave.
Yeah.
What was the test on that mono?
This is 40.
Okay,
so you could probably get by on a smaller hook with 30, because 40 is right at the point where you don't want to do the last step, which is this part here. And to finish this fly off, you got to be able to stack the deer hair on the hook before you finish the loop for the weed guard. So at this point, what we do is we take the mono and we feed it up through the eye of the hook from underneath. And all I'm going to do now is size it. So I get it so that it's clearing the hook a little bit at the bottom, and I hold it in place. And then about a 1/4 inch above the eye, I'm going to cut it right there. Take my finger and push it back and put a little kink into it, right where the eye is. That sizes it. So now that I can get it out of the way to do the rest of the fly. And when I tie this back in, you tie the weed guard in right as the last step before you finish the fly. Bring my thread back up to where the point of the hook is. And then I put in the tail. And the tail is just some Flashabou or silver flash of some type. And I don't need a whole whack of it, but a nice skein of it would be fine. You know, a dozen strands of this stuff, maybe 4 or 5 if you're using regular Flashabou. I'm going to measure it back about 2 shank lengths from the eye, just to cut the stuff out of this. Oh. And I will now measure it a little closer. I want it to extend at least a shank length behind the bend of the hook. So I'll tie it down there. And trim off the excess at the front here. And wrap that in. Bring the thread right back to the tie-in point for the tail. I got one strand there that's a little long. Now what we're going to do is the tail of the fly without the flash, and that stuff is these hackles. Now what I'm going to show you is I've pre-prepared a bunch of these things sitting on my bench, held down with a piece of sticky tape, that are all ready to go so that I can pick them up in pairs. We'll take the yellow ones, and they're both approximately the same size and shape. Now these are a little fat, I think, but I was running out of ones that were skinnier fibers. And you'll see they have a curve. And I have one that's going to go, they're going to go on the fly like this with the curve going opposite each other. So I'll take the first one and measure it to where it's just a little bit shy of where the flash is. And I'll strip the fibers off that stem and lay the feather along the side of the hook and do a wrap over 1, 2, 3, and it will, the stem, if I hold it right on here, will help keep the tail in the correct orientation. There you go. So that it's parallel to the hook shank. The curve of the feather is parallel to the hook shank. That didn't work. Back up. This is the part that I always had trouble with. I want to get that thing so that it's, the curve is parallel to the hook shank and going straight back.
You can use your pliers and crimp that stem at the time.
Yeah, that might do the trick too. Let's try
That will
that.
hold it.
Let's try that with the next one. So now I'll measure the second one. And it works, helps if you've got a rotary vise and you can turn it sideways, but you don't have to. And I'll measure the same thing, measure the length, strip the fuzz off. Let's try Florin's idea and crimp that stem a bit and lay it right on top. Hold it in place. First, a light wrap. That's got it. Yeah. Trim that guy off.
And for extra safety, you can also bend back the stem and
Yeah.
do a few wraps over it, and then you'll never lose those hackles ever.
Well, I'm going to solve that problem with the dab of, oh crap, that came off. There we go. Got it. I'm going to solve that problem. It's called super glue. Just a little touch. Now the next one is the Grizzly hackle. I have a pair of these, the same thing. Measure them for the same length. And I'm going to mount that on the hook right next to the yellow hackle. Hold it in place. And trim, bring this forward. Turn it off. And then the next one. Measure the same thing. Down. Give it a wrap. Stand back and get rid of that bit. A piece of flash there. Okay. Now, because the shank is going to be shrouded by, hopefully, the deer hair when I tie that stuff in, I'm not going to do more than just wrap some thread up the shank here and cover that up. So that's the tail of the fly. And you can see you've got those splayed out and you've got the grizzly in front of the yellow. So it gives it a little variation in color. Wrap my thread up the shank. And I'm going to come up to, again, little more than a 1/4 inch behind the eye, about a 1/3 of the way back from the eye. And this is where the deer hair fun starts. Now, the first thing I'm going to change the order a little bit from the way that Dave showed it in his video, because I want this brown deer hair to be on top of the head. So I'm going to tie it in first. And I'll clean it off right tight to the hide so you can see I've clipped it down pretty good. And I'll measure this stuff so that it's about shank length, I would guess, maybe a little, the full shank, maybe a little bit longer. And trim the butts short, about, oh, I'd say 3/8 of an inch. Hope you guys don't mind me using metric, not using metric for distance measurements. Then I turn it around so that the butts face the back of the fly. And at this point, I'm going to take, again, with the super glue, put a teeny bit on there, because this is going to help keep the deer hair from spinning. Now, this is where that flat nylon will also help with that. I'll set this down on the hook right smack on top, do a loose wrap over the top, and down underneath, well, over the top, down underneath. My throat, have to unkink my thread. These threads, when you've wound it several times around the hook, they tend to take a little twist. And when you make a loose wrap over the hook, the loop tends to fall forward if it's got the wrong twist. So by spinning my bobbin counterclockwise, it makes the loop go back towards my fingers. And over, come on, over top. There we go. Get out of there. There we go. And when I get there, instead of pulling down, I bring it underneath and pull up. See that? Round and pull up. And I've got my finger holding the butt ends of those so that they don't go around the hook. Now you see that it sticks up a bit there. Turn it upside down. And I'll get my white deer hair, because it's going to have, this thing's going to have a white belly. I'll try and find of this stuff the longest deer hair I can get, and get right down to the hide, because this is fairly short hair. And take a batch of deer hair out. Now, the size of the batch, the first one I've kept fairly sparse. And the white, I'm going to make it a little bit thicker than the other one. I want to take my, oh, another tool I forgot to tell you about is, when you're working with deer hair, you need a comb. You got to take the fuzz out. Same thing with polar bear. Otherwise, it doesn't stack worth darn. You can do the same thing. Turn it around so that the butts may face the back. Again, just a teeny bit of super glue in there. Hold it down like that. Thread up, over and down, and pull up. Down and pull up, and try and keep that deer hair from spinning around the hook. Good and snug. So far, so good. Now bring it around. There's a couple of stragglers here. I'm going to get out of the way. There we go. And then the yellow stuff. Now this is not pure yellow, but it's close enough. I'll take a chunk of that, about the same size as the white in terms of the how much deer hair. Take it right down to the hide. Come up fuzzes. If you're spinning deer hair, that's really important, is to get the fuzz out, because otherwise they don't spin worth the poop. I'm going to lay this down right on top of where these other ones are. And I'm going to put a little glue on the thread, because this is going to hold it in. Lay it down with the butts facing the back. And again, up, over, down, and pull up. Down and pull up. So this is how you stack deer hair so that it doesn't spin around the fly. That's it. Now you can see everything's facing forward. And what I do now is I stroke it back, top and bottom, back from the eye. And I'll bring my thread down so it's kind of half shank back from the eye of the hook. And you can probably fold all this stuff back with your fingers like that to make the bullet head. And you'll see I've still got a little bit of space in front between where the deer hair has been tied in and the eye. And there's a reason for that. The other little tool is I've got this oversized straw, and I can push this back to make this bullet head. This is quite useful. And when I get it back there, I'll grab that with my left hand, and I will make the first wrap around the bullet head as a loose one, and then again pull up, around and pull up. Now once I get here, there's a few little stragglers that never make it back. So I just take my tweezers and pull some of those out. Get it there. I'd probably trim them off if I had to. I'm gonna do a whole bunch of wraps right behind that bullet head. Make it nice and secure. And once again, rather than do a whip finish, I'm going to put this dab of super glue in there. And then I will wrap a few wraps of thread through the super glue and bring it up over and turn it off. So now I've got my basic fly shape, and all I need really to do is trim off the stragglers. This is not great deer hair, so it left a bunch of stragglers. If I had everything was equivalent to that brown stuff, it would have been a lot better. I need to finish the weed guard. So I'll take the hook out of the vise, and where the hell did it go? There it is. I'll bring it around underneath, put the tag end up through the eye again, the hook back in the vise. And this is another little trick. You'll see again, I want to pull it up right to where that kink was that I put in the fly. And at that point, I'm going to trim off the tag end so that there's just a little bit sticking above the eye. Having the little part of the scissors that is can cut that stuff. And I'll take my pliers and do the flatten the end thing like that. And attach my thread. It came out of the bobbin. So your drugstore bobbin threader, which is used for threading dental floss into your teeth, I will rethread my bobbin.
I like that. I've never tried that technique, Dave.
Yeah, that you know, you can buy them cheap. You don't have to spend anything fancy on the bobbin threader. So I'm going to tie this off onto the front of just behind the eye. Now I've probably got this head a little bit too far back from the eye on this one, but it's close enough. And push this up through the eye of the hook and hold the flattened end out of the way and wrap behind the eye, hold it down, and then wrap back over it and to really cinch down that flattened piece of material. This is where 40 pound is kind of the maximum size I would use on this size of an eye. I think 30 would have been better. Anyway, I will finish the nose of the fly. And a good double wrap. This guy needs eyes. So a trick with this is, with these eyes, is to use your bodkin and open up your rubber cement and take a little teeny dab of rubber cement. It's too much. And stick it right there onto the side of the head. Peel off the eye off the paper, and then use your bodkin again to try and get that thing to sit right where the super glue or the goo was, the rubber cement was. Put it in place. There's one. Go to the other side. Just a little bit of rubber cement. Just on there. That back on the shoe glue. Get the next eye. On there. Oop, right side up. Come on, right side up. Right where the shoe glue or the rubber cement was. And so there's your eyes. The rubber cement will set up a little bit later. It's still pliable, so you can kind of smudge the eye around into position. And it will stay there after it's dried up. Back to the Kleenex. And now I have this other little trick that I use, and it just disappeared. Here it is. I have a little bit of steel wool, and after you've used your bodkin to put glue and stuff on, I just poke it through the steel wool and scrub it back and forth, and that gets all of the super glue off your bodkin. And that's your fly for today.
Kind of scrappy looking guy, but very effective, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think it is a bit of scrappy looking, but I think you're right. I think it's going to make a lot of noise in the water. I think that's the whole point, and looks a little bit less finished. Again, I think it would look a
Flies
lot
don't
better.
always have to be pretty to be
Yeah,
effective.
and I also think it would look a little better if I had better quality deer hair. Because you're kind of pissing around with, this stuff is pretty old and it's very dry. So I think fresher deer hair, like the brown stuff was nice. It was longer, and I wasn't dealing with all of the hefty butt. You know how it gets more hollow and wide around the butt. So you're dealing more with the hair and less with the butt of the deer. And that I think would make a lot tidier head. But you do with what you got.
Well,
So now I'm gonna stop.
I think the aesthetics of it would be more for the angler than for the fish. I
Yeah.
think this will certainly catch fish quite effectively.
That's
There you
a really good point, Mohammed, because 90% of the stuff is so we think it looks really cool.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
It's your artistic sensibilities that get hurt if you don't make it pretty. It's not the fish. So, and so that you could tie dozens of flies out of this little guy. You don't have to spend a whole whack of money on the expensive super glue. And but keep around. I have if you go to the hobby store in Hillside Mall, they sell super glue in a variety of different viscosities, but they also sell a super glue remover. So you should probably keep a bottle of that around, because you're going to get, if you're working with super glue, you're going to get some on your fingers. And I got a little bit of it around here, but you take this super glue remover and put a little on a Kleenex and wipe your hand off, and it would take the super glue right off. So there you go. Dave Whitlock's Waking Minnow.
Good tribute, Dave.
There we go.
From one Dave to the other.
Yes. Dave was a nice guy. He was really a pleasant fella to meet and talk to.
How would you fish that fly, and for what species?
Well, I would variety. I think if I was going to fish, and I'll tie some of these up for fishing for pike at Elk Lake. I've got enough, as you can see, I've got enough. So I would tie up, a bunch of these and fish them at Elk Lake, and I start off fishing them on the surface, casting into the weeds if there's around in the weeds. And the other thing you could do is you could put it on a type 3 sink line with a short leader, like a 5-foot, 6-foot leader, and let it go down, let it sink, and then strip it back over the weeds. And the weed guard will keep it from getting hung up. And you could sit it right down on top of the weeds. And it might work for trout as well. I would think if you're getting it down there and it's on top of the weeds and you're doing a slow troll or a slow strip, the trout might find it interesting.
Yeah, I think certainly would work for bass as well. And
Yep.
I would think trout would definitely take it. You could use it like a streamer pattern in a river, and I think it would
Yeah.
do well.
Yeah. Being deer hair, it'll be floating unless you have a bit of a sinking tip line or something like that to get it down.
Mhm.
Mind you, once the deer hair gets wet, it won't float that well, but
Yeah.
You can put dumbbell eyes to give it weight if that would be the intent.
yeah. And if you did that, you could
Skip the
You
weed
have-
guard and tie it upside down. Yeah.
yeah.
And
But
you
I
could
like
always,
I like the split tail. I think that's kind of different. And
Yeah.
the flash hanging out the back is going to be a little attracting. So there we
yeah,
go.
the split tail is actually really good because it also pulses in the water when you strip it.
Yeah, that's
So
the idea.
That
Yeah.
that gives a lot of action.
Yeah.
And
Just
you
takes
could
a little
always,
To get
Oh,
them takes a little practice to get them to go out like that.
yeah. But you could also put a split shot right at the eye if you didn't put dumbbell eyes on, and you could
Yeah.
still use it and sink it down a bit.
There you go. So Florin, you're on.
All right. And now, as usual, for something simple. You've seen the pictures. This is a bit of a no-name fly. It was I saw it in a presentation a couple of weeks ago, and everybody was calling it the green thing. And somebody said, "Oh, but I heard this fly called the green machine." Whatever, it's the green thing. And because it's our last fly tying session before Christmas, I thought I'm gonna spruce it up a little bit and use red thread instead of the black or olive, so that it's gonna be the green Christmas thing.
So this is not a Don Anderson fly then.
Well, Don did the presentation, but it sounded like from the conversation there with some of the old timers, I got that feeling that you have so often down here in Alberta, that this is a secret that everybody knows, you know, if you're part of the correct group of everybody.
Yes.
And so this was something that everybody knew and fished back in the 80s and whatever, but it's a basic, you know, I think it's a basic green lake fly. The guys were saying that they've had good luck with this fly on streams as well. So, you know, you can use it. I would primarily try to fish this in a lake, but I think in a stream that should work too. So what I like to do is, this is supposed to be a little bit weighted. So what I normally do is I just prepare my hooks ahead of time. So I have here like basically a dozen hooks, and I left a couple with just a wire tied on them for today's session. And so I'm gonna skip the first part, which is tying on the wire. You can put a bead on if you want, or you can fish it unweighted if you're fishing lakes with a sinking line. That would work just as well. Okay, so the thread is 6/0 uni in red, and I'm just going to start here towards the back. And go to the tail end of the fly. Now for the materials, it's a very simple fly, and it uses stuff that is normally discarded. So for the hackle, I just have some hand hackle here in some kind of brown. For the tail, I'm using this, and I don't keep the whole skin on, I just pull a few feathers off and use them throughout. These are these hand back patches that you buy, like a whole patch of skin, and they're fairly cheap, and they come in various shades of brown and a little darker than this. These make terrific tails also on things like hares, ears, and so on. It's very nice soft hackle.
Used to be able to get those. Used to be able to get those things for like $6 or $7 a head.
Yeah, well, you buy one of those and it's a lifetime supply of tails on all your nymphs, you know. And then what I normally do is I've bought, you know, 2 or 3 different colors to have, you know, the whole range. And I don't know what they cost these days, but they're still at the cheap end of the spectrum. So just pluck off a little bundle of these fibers and measure a tail here. And just attach this the usual way. Just a few wraps is gonna do it. I'm gonna go back, bring the thread all the way back. I'm not gonna worry about trimming these because it's gonna get all covered up. Now for the body itself, what I'm using is the stuff that Dave was discarding earlier when you saw him stripping the feather. You know, all this fluff, any soft feather that you use in fly tying has a bunch of this fuzzy soft stuff at the base of the feather. And this is going to be the main ingredient, and all I'm going to do is I'm just going to dab it on the thread. Now, normally when I do dub things, I don't use dubbing wax. This is an exception. It's probably the only exception to my no dubbing wax rule. So I'm just going to very lightly, you don't want to put too much because then all you create is a mess. Just a little bit of dubbing wax, just a touch. And then what I do with these bits of fluff is I grab a bunch of fluff between my fingers, and then I take my scissors, which I keep protected with a little silicone tip here. And then rather than stripping, which you would normally do with this, I'm going to cut it. Okay? And this may sound a little fussy, but there is a reason for it. And the reason is that you get this, and if you haven't, you still have some of that bad stuff at the base of the fibers, just trim it off. This way, this is going to be easy to dab on the thread, and you're not going to have any of those kind of spiky bits at the base of the fibers sticking out and mucking up your fly. So just put it on the thread. You should have had enough dubbing wax there to encourage these things to stick to your thread. And just wrap around. This is going to be a fuzzy body, so don't worry about the things sticking out on you. If that's not enough, and it usually won't, it takes several steps to get enough dubbing here. Just a tiny little bit of dubbing wax on your fingers. Just kind of rub your fingers a little bit with a little dubbing wax. Also helps to manipulate the material better. So add a little more and go over the wire. I still need just a little bit here. So you can see this feather is pretty much consumed, and whatever feather you started with, by the time you've exhausted all this fluff, what's left is going to be good for something else. So you just set it aside, have some of those little Ziploc bags, for example, and keep, because the rejects from this process are going to be the good stuff for other flies. And I usually just keep them together with the original bag of, okay, there we are. With the original bag of the feathers that I'm working with. So this way it's easy to keep track of where things are. All right, at this point, I want my hackle. And again, I choose how many flies I want to tie. I prepare the hackles, I strip the fluff. Now the fluff on this one was the wrong color, so that's why I didn't keep it for the dubbing. And this is going to be tied wet style, so I'm just going to attach it here right in front of the wire. It looks like I need a vise adjustment, so just forgive me a moment here. Just a little tighter on the hook. Okay, that's good. If you're nervous about your hackle slipping out, again, what I said earlier, just fold back and do a few wraps over the stem, and that's going to lock it in place if you're not very fond of things like super glue. And now to finish off the head of the fly, so there's a bit of thorax left here, and that's going to call for a little more of the green fuzz. And I think I ran out of waxed thread here, so I'm just going to put a little bit more wax. And then again, repeat, trim a little bit of this. And whoops. This has different ideas. It wants to fly about. This is a bit like tying with deer hair. You want to have a vacuum nearby. Okay. So there we go. See, this is sticking out. Not quite wrapped on the thread. Okay, bring your thread to the front and then just wrap the hackle. So, to make sure you've tied your feather with the so that the fibers are going to be sweeping back, and then just encourage them to go in the right direction by folding a little bit by hand as you wrap the hackle. A few turns, and then bring the hackle up front. Couple of turns over the stem of the hackle, and then pull the fibers back. Couple of turns over the hackle, and then you have the little tip here. Trim it off, and then this is ready for finishing. A few more wraps of thread. That'll build you a nice little head. This is the Christmas spirit. And now for the whip finish. See, this is the threader that Dave was talking about. I have every place I have fly tying tools, I have a few of these handy. But they get tangled up in other things, so you have to watch it. Okay, and then just a whip finish. Whoops. And for safety, a second whip finish. Experience shows that after the first whip finish fails, you can still fish the fly a little bit. By the time your second whip finish were to fail, the rest of the fly is so smashed up that it doesn't matter anymore. So this 2 whip finishes is enough. And that's the fly. It's ugly, and I think it will catch fish.
Yeah, it looks great. Love it.
Very nice.
I
Florin.
like that fly. Yeah.
And I would try it on the lakes around Victoria for sure. Even for piranhas, it's not much effort.
That thing, all you'd have maybe is a little bit of orange left at the front. There'd be nothing else.
Yeah, well, have you tried a bear hook on the piranhas?
I don't think so.
A bit of orange thread and the bear hook, you know.
Actually, the best thing is a bear hook with a hunk of meat on it. So,
But that would be bait fishing, wouldn't it?
yeah, it would be.
You could always just dangle your finger or toes in the water.
Yeah.
No. That is I feel that's a bad idea even on some of the pike lakes.
Yeah.
You know, if the fishing is good, it's like don't put your fingers in the water.
So meanwhile, I contacted the head office at the company that we dealt with, and I said, please send me a list of flies that I need to tie before I go on this trip. Fine, she says, here's the list from our head guide. So I tied literally about 60 flies to take with me. You know, everything like, balanced leeches, and there was copper johns and all sorts of things in there. Get down, guide look at my box. Nah, we don't use any of those, he says. None of that.
Oh, man.
This is all a ploy to sell you flies.
I don't know. Well, I ended up having to use the bloody guide's flies all the time. Of course, he had to get a substantial extra tip at the end.
Yes.
So what kinds of flies were they using then?
All they were using was streamers,
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
but big streamers, you know.
Oh, was
lots
that
of-
like you were talking about the clousers as well, the sparsely tied clousers?
No, that's for, I mean, they're using stuff
That's for
like,
both.
literally almost like this stuff.
But Tony, think about
That's
this differently. This is making you a better fly tyer. Seriously, I mean, there's a silver lining in all of this.
Yeah,
Like
I mean-
at the end of those 60 flies, you've gained some very valuable skills.
I mean, seriously, I mean, you guys probably can't see it, but I tied every single one of these flies to go.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Very good.
What am I going to do with them now?
Well, you populate the club fly